So I'm going to show you an example of a dry crevice garden. Crevice gardens can be really great for dry climates as long as you build them right with nice deep soil and choose plants with nice deep taproots. So here we go. This is my dry crevice garden. I'm going to try to get back a bit here if you can see it. Those buns down there, if you like tight buns, you got some tight buns here. This is a Acantholemon trojanum.
I think the name of the game is the dry tops and wet bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we haven't said that before because it sounds so bad.
But, yes, well, this is the Talking Dirty podcast. So.
Oh, right. I'm allowed that. All right. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking a little bit Parisian in his stripes, his red, his blue, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I have to say the sun is just peeping through the clouds here. I don't know how it is with you in Cambridgeshire, but here we have the beaming Thordis, Sophia Maria Fredrickson, beaming away beautifully.
It's always, I always wait to see which way around my middle names will come out when this podcast starts. Maybe. Joining us for the first time ever on Talking Dirty, Kate Bradbury, wildlife gardener, author, writer. I'm sure we've all pored over your books and articles. Do you have any middle names to share before we get stuck into the plants?
Grace.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. It's Catherine Grace, officially.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
But I never use it.
Any particular reasons behind the names?
I think my mum wanted to call me Grace as my first name, but my dad said that would be dangerous if I wasn't very graceful. So yes, it's my middle name.
It would have been an ironic name if someone had given me the name Grace. I see where he was coming from. I'm one of the clumsiest, like a walking heifer lump. So. It wouldn't have worked. On the video version of this podcast, people can see that your backdrop, rather than a room in your house, you have got a beautiful photo of your garden behind you.
Yes.
Before we get stuck into talking about your new book and your gardening endeavours, let's just talk about this plot.
Right, okay, so this is my garden. It was this or a pile of washing that I haven't put away yet because I'm in my spare room, which sort of doubles up as the office. So, yes, I'll just be really honest with you there. So my garden, bought the house in 2019 and sort of completely raised it and then turned it into this wildlife oasis. So I don't think you can see the pond, but there's a pond in there, quite a big one, and a sort of wildflower meadow, so just a 40-foot garden. It's very standard sort of terraced Victorian terrace, but yes, lots of things for wildlife.
And Kate, what is the tree in your garden? I can see at the back.
You should be able to see three. There's a silver.
I can see two anyway.
So the two planted together close to each other. There's a hawthorn, a standard hawthorn, and a rowan. And then on the other side, but I think when this photo was taken, it was still very, very small. There's a very skinny silver birch that just goes up. So yeah, 3 trees.
And you're known predominantly for wildlife gardening. Yeah. When did that whole side of your gardening endeavour start? Did you start as a wildlife gardener? Did you develop into a wildlife gardener?
Pretty much. It all happened in we're going back nearly 20 years. So my ex-partner, or my partner at the time, her housemate threw an old duvet into the backyard. It was, when you're in your 20s and you're just useless. He threw an old duvet that was a bit mouldy. Instead of like washing it or throwing it away, he just chucked it into the backyard, and a red-tailed bumblebee made a nest in it, and the neighbours complained. We didn't realise we were in our 20s, and the neighbours complained, and the landlord got in touch and said, if you don't get rid of these bees, then we will. And we were like, what bees? And then I'd sort of got in touch with Bumblebee Conservation Trust, who'd only been around for a few weeks. They'd just launched, and so I got in touch with them and they told me how to move a bumblebee nest. So having not really realised that this bumblebee nest was there, suddenly I was sort of dressing up in an old net curtain, cutting this nest out of a duvet and putting it into a shoebox with lots of grass and moss, and then taking it on this midnight journey to my allotment. And then I put it under a hedge in my allotment and fell in love with them. And it sort of all started from there, really.
Yeah, clearly you're not the average person who phones up the sort of Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and you already had an allotment. So clearly a lot of sort of nature appreciation going on before the duvet incident.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a gardener since I was 3. You know, it's always been in me. But I think certainly in my early 20s, you know, I was a gardener, but I never fully appreciated the role that wildlife played. I think a lot of gardeners don't. And so, yeah, suddenly it all just sort of came sort of crashing. I think I say that the bees found me rather than I found them. Because that sort of pivotal moment of Johnny throwing the duvet out of the window, out of the back door, just sort of changed the course of my life and career, really, because I just got completely obsessed. So
yeah, but there's also something else to say about bees, I think, and bees' nests and all the rest of it. And I think your neighbours at the time were being overly worried.
Yeah,
because most bees, I mean, they, including honeybees, of course, everybody's familiar with those. But if you don't attack them, they won't attack you.
Exactly. Yeah. It was, you know, it was one of those things where they're all very small backyards. Everybody was renting. Everybody was very young, and so there was a huge disconnect. With the natural.
But that's all part of the learning curve, Kate, isn't it? Which is something that we do. It comes with age. I mean, and another remark you said there is a lot of gardeners don't probably appreciate. Sorry, I've got a very vocal cat in here.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Many gardeners start off with, shall we say, a certain amount of ignorance about wildlife. It becomes apparent when you're handling the soil, you're planting, you're digging, you're doing whatever you're doing, and then suddenly you become aware of the fact that you're not alone. There are other beings with you and around you. Yeah. And I think that's one of the joys of it. And one of the joys of your garden, I can see, is going to be pollinators.
Yes, lots and lots of them. Yes, although not as many this year, which was quite upsetting because it was so dry. But yes, sort of when we have
that photograph was not this year. I'm thinking you're sitting in your garden now, you see. It's all an illusion, but
it's true, this year has been hard because, of course, it's this cycle. If the plants don't have enough water, then they're not producing as much nectar, and then there's just not as much or as much liquid full stop, so there aren't as many aphids, which then mean that there is not as much of the wasps and the birds and everything. I mean, the cycle, it kind of blows your mind.
Yeah, it's been quite eye-opening actually this year. I think this is obviously the worst drought that I've ever known. I wasn't around in 76, but yeah, I mean, for me it was like, whoa, a lot of plants didn't actually flower. And I hadn't really, I know this sounds really stupid as like someone who's got gardening qualifications, it hadn't occurred to me that really stressed plants just won't flower. I thought they'd flower quickly, or they'd flower, you know, sooner and then be over with very quickly and run to seed, like bolting. We all know about bolting. But yeah, loads of plants and loads of sort of so-called drought tolerant plants didn't actually flower, which was really, quite, as I say, quite eye-opening. And then I just find caterpillars on just the tiniest little scraps of plants. I've raised more caterpillars in my bathroom this year than ever before. I've raised about 100, just because I kept finding them on plants that weren't going to sustain them, because the adult butterflies and moths were sort of desperate. They were laying eggs on plants that they knew wouldn't really cut it, but they had no choice. So yeah, it's been quite a difficult year really for a wildlife lover.
I'm disappointed now that I've never thought to raise any caterpillars in my bathroom, but I love the fact that I think once you get into any kind of wildlife gardening, and I can't claim to be anywhere near as far down the road as you, but it is a big focus for me in how I garden, and it's what a lot of the joy I get out of my garden. And I think you get sucked in and you do find yourself kind of going a little bit above and beyond.
Yeah,
because you're emotionally invested.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the park. In my local park, you know, if a butterfly lays eggs on nettles and then the park keepers come and cut down those nettles, and those butterflies aren't going to survive. So when I find butterflies in the park, when I find caterpillars in the park, I always take them and raise them at home, because I know that they're not going to survive. So yeah, but weirdly, it was quite a good, round here it's been quite a good year for small tortoiseshells and peacock butterflies. So I found a lot of caterpillars, and there was one day where I was picking off the caterpillars, and the guy with his strimmer was waiting for me to get all the caterpillars off, and I just about managed it. So yeah, I've done some good work, and I've just got this little setup. I've got this mesh cage that I sit in my bath, and my friends come around and I think you're very strange, but yeah.
I was about to ask whether or not being an official kind of wildlife author and writer protected you from people thinking you were completely mad, but clearly not.
Slightly. I think. I mean, it's it's been going on for quite a while now, and I think initially, I used to get laughed at a lot, and then as the book started coming out, and the occasional TV appearance would sort of be slipped in. This, they respect it a bit more, and, but yeah, they draw the line at keeping caterpillars in the bath, I have to say. Sadly, because everyone should have caterpillars in the bath.
They're not aquatic caterpillars, to confirm. It's not like
no, they're in a mesh cage and they eat nettles. Yeah.
Talking of books, of course, you have got a beautiful new book newly out. I think Alan has a.
Oh, Alan's got one.
Oh, everyone apart from me has got theirs to hand.
All got one.
It's become part one with your garden. That was quite amazing.
Oh, really? Did it? Oh, look, that's cool. Right, here it is.
It's absolutely beautiful. The tree in my garden. I just want to say I had a PDF. I haven't given away my book. The tree in my garden, choose one tree, plant it, and change the world. I think that's a great way to incentivize people. You are clearly mad about trees. You've managed to fit 3 into your 40-foot garden. How did the book come about?
How did the book come about? I mean, I think it was a sort of joint collaboration with me and DK, really. Once you've written one book about wildlife gardening, sort of where do you go from there? And I think I just, climate change is sort of starting to really sort of hit home. I think we're all starting to notice the differences. It's all getting a bit scary, and I think there are things that we can do as individuals. Not to say that we don't need to stop using fossil fuels, we don't need to reduce our consumption of meat and all of those things, but actually if we've got outside space, we can do amazing things with it, and those amazing things can bring wildlife into our gardens, and also every single leaf absorbs carbon dioxide. So growing trees, planting trees, it gives us ownership. It plants something that we will fall in love with, that will connect us to the seasons, that will bring us closer to nature, and also do a really valuable job of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which we desperately need to do. So yeah, it was just all about that, really. And just there's 22 million gardens in the UK. If everyone planted another tree tomorrow, or the first tree, that's 22 million trees. That's a significant amount of trees. So yes, I just want us to all just do more, really. I just always want everyone to do more for wildlife, do more for the planet, and ultimately that means doing more for ourselves. So
Actually, yesterday, walking around the garden, we just had some quite stiff northerly winds here. And I was walking through the woodland, and it's absolutely littered with acorns. I just suddenly thought, here we have trees.
Yeah.
I mean, with a little bit what you're saying. And there's something I just like to touch on. It's a tree that's not in your book, Kate. It's Paulownia tomentosa, the Chinese foxglove tree.
Oh, yes, yes.
I was reading an article recently by Robin Lane Fox, and this pertains to drought. Paulownia tomentosa has an enormously long taproot that goes down in search of water, so it can survive when other trees perhaps are not surviving so well. But then getting that water from down below, it brings it up, and then the water then goes out into the side shoots.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. I mean, I know that Robin Lane Fox is a respected garden writer, and I doubt that he would write such a thing without checking his facts. But I haven't checked it. But it just occurred to me, and it's also a tree with very large leaves, which is good for the getting rid of carbon and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it absorbs lots of carbon. I mean, we really do. We need to be thinking of drought tolerant trees to grow.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite a sort of, it wasn't a dilemma, but in the book, writing, there's the wildlife trees, and then there's the climate change trees.
Yeah.
And obviously the book will be published in the United States as well. So there's a sort of, the trees had to work for sort of both sides of the Atlantic.
It must have been really tricky because I think it's 50 trees in the book.
Mm.
Tricky to you can't, I suppose, list all of them, and you must be sitting there kind of wanting to cram in another tree and thinking, well, that'll make it 51. Or
yeah, I mean, I literally handed it in and then spent another 3 weeks like, what have I missed? And I knew that I was going to miss loads.
Kate,
yeah,
Kate, all is not lost. There's another book.
There's another book. Yeah, but I think for me, certainly, I wanted to make it as accessible as possible and easy for beginners. And people who've never planted a tree before could get something from this book. So I generally sort of, I suppose, I mean, I wouldn't call it safe, but maybe it is a bit safe. Maybe, you know, just there's some very commonly grown trees in there, very easy to grow trees. Yeah, maybe the next one will have a foxglove tree in it.
well, also coming at it from a wildlife gardening point of view, you want to include quite a lot of natives because, as you point out, these are the trees that have evolved alongside the local wildlife. So if, you know, and again, it is difficult when you're serving different audiences in different countries, but, you know, here in the UK, there are a number of native trees which are absolutely wonderful at different times of year for, you know, to serve different wildlife needs.
Yes, definitely. And the thing about the sort of general rule with wildlife gardening is that for pollinators, for the nectar feeders and the pollen gatherers, it doesn't really matter if it's native or not. Some species are more fussy than others, so some do require native flowers, but most are generalists, and most, you know, nectar is just sugar water and it's the same regardless of what flower you get it from. Pollen is pollen. It does vary in quality, but that doesn't necessarily equate to its nativeness or its non-nativeness. So as a general rule, you can grow a mixture of natives and non-native flowering plants, but the trees and the shrubs, for the leaf munchers, for the caterpillars, for the aphids, for all of those things, they usually, less so aphids, but very much so caterpillars, they need to be native plants. So, you know, some butterflies will lay eggs only on one type of plant, some moths will lay eggs on only 3 or 4 types of plant, and they're all natives. And actually something that I really want to do is I want to look at if we can have non-native versions of, so for example, the silver birch, which attracts, you know, lots of species of moth, for example, the buff tip, which actually looks like a silver birch twig. Does our native silver birch, could it be replaced or, you know, complemented by, you know, does the Himalayan birch serve the same number of species? What about the American birches? Do they work as well in the same way? Because with climate change, the silver birch, it's quite a moisture-loving tree. It's probably not going to do very well going forward. Could some of the more drought-tolerant birches come through and replace those things? So I think it would be really interesting to actually find out if some of these non-natives, certainly within the same family, can provide the same habitats as the natives.
And obviously the fact that we're in this point where climate change is feeling scarier is a driver behind writing the book. It makes it both, I suppose, more challenging and more exciting, because you want to have these natives, but equally there's no point planting a tree, as you say, that isn't going to thrive. So then, and also I suppose, like we've seen all of these hawk moths turning up this summer in the heat. I've heard it sort of suggested that that's because heat, mainland Europe has pushed them to migrate north to our shores.
These are the hummingbird hawk moths.
Yeah. So when you see actually maybe a slight change in the fauna, then introducing those different, you know, trees to serve those species, because it's really complicated.
Yeah, it does. And I think that I'm sure there are some, but I think there need to be a lot more studies of predicting what's going to fly over on its own, what we can help come over. You know, like, can you imagine it, you know, at Dover, there's lots of little species, you know, what about the amphibians, you know, all the other things that are finding it too hot there that could actually take refuge in the UK, you know, and help, you know, push them north. Obviously, we're going to run out of north. We do need to stop temperatures increasing. But in the meantime, yeah, there's lots of things that I think we could do that we're possibly not yet doing. But yeah, certainly bringing trees from, and also as part of the research, you know, that I was doing for the book, you know, I spoke to Kevin at Kew, the arboriculturalist at Kew, and who replaced Tony Kirkham, and he said, you know, you've got a beech tree. Our beech tree, Fagus sylvatica, is going to really struggle with the droughts, but actually beech in its range goes down quite far down to the Caucasus. So actually you could get Fagus sylvatica, but from over there, from down there, and use the seeds from those plants to bring them here, and they'll be more drought tolerant. They'll just be naturally more drought tolerant. So there's lots of things we can do there as well. I found it really fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, that's quite a good point. If you take seed or propagation material from drought areas of the same plant, and just shove them up a few hundred miles,
then they'll do better.
Good idea. I like that.
Yeah, and also crossbreeding as well. I mean, there's so much crossbreeding done with like elms. I live in Brighton, where we've got the national collection of elm trees. Most of them are hybrids, which are resistant to Dutch elm disease. There's loads of things that we can do. It's absolutely loads of things.
Yeah, we have an elm tree in the garden here, which is a scrappy looking old thing because it was next to a big old tree, which I took out because the elm is probably now about 30 feet tall.
Wow.
And it's living and it's not affected by the Dutch elm beetle. And I know that the Dutch elm beetle flies at a height of around sort of 6 feet or something like that, 2 meters. So that's the minute an elm tree grows that tall, it becomes infected because they'll pounce on it. But mine has survived. And I took the other tree out so that the elm could have a chance.
Right.
It's a bit misshapen because it's been pushed to one side by the other tree. But it was important to me to feel that elms, I mean, they've just gone. I mean, I saw them during my childhood. I saw Dutch elm disease and what it did. And there's just numerous dead trees. And I always remember being, as a child, learning about trees. And the description of an elm tree was like a cumulus cloud. And I thought, that's just so right.
Yeah.
And so it's important to me to leave the elm tree in my garden to just see how it does. So I mean, I keep close watch on it because I see it out of my bathroom window.
Yeah.
So
that's nice. Yeah, we've got elm disease sort of volunteers all around Brighton, who sort of tell the elm I don't know the elm team. We've got like dedicated team at Brighton Council who
team of elm elves.
Yeah, they are basically, and they go and they go and do things.
I love that. I mean, this book, fascinating to put together. I can see how it would be time consuming because you've got to whittle down your trees and you've got a lot of research to do into climate change statistics. And then it also starts delving into things like what's going on beneath the soil and that relationship between fungi and trees as well.
Yeah. I really enjoyed researching all about fungi, actually. That sort of stuff really interests me. I love it. I love the idea that we're learning that trees are community species. They don't really like being planted on their own. They don't really like being street trees. They really like being planted in small copses where the fungi travels between them, and there's some, I think it's beech again, actually. There's some examples of where you've got a beech tree that is pretty much dead, but all of the other beech trees around it are keeping it alive because they're feeding it with through the fungi. And you just read stuff and you're like, wow, they're holding up their friends. So yeah,
it's a symbiotic relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
quite astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's research coming out now that's saying we need to be prepared for the fact that one day we're going to find out that trees are sentient beings, and I think that would be quite incredible. And all plants, maybe, who knows? I like to think that they might be.
Well, they're certainly very, very clever, as we find out on this podcast. Absolutely extraordinary plants. And
well, we all know somebody who talked to trees, don't we?
Show and tell is a big part of this podcast. Obviously, it's slightly different today because we're talking about a lot of sort of trees that many of us might know. But I know you have brought along a few sprigs, rather than whole trees like in a pot. You brought along some sprigs to brandish at the camera. So what did you want to sort of rave about?
I thought I'd start with this one. So this is hawthorn. So hawthorn's my favourite tree in the world because it's really versatile. You can grow it as a shrub, you can grow it as a hedge, you can grow it as a standard tree, you can grow it as a kind of scrubby, kind of huge tree thing. It very technical there. It flowers in spring, and my favourite thing about the flowers is that they smell of dead bodies. So they release the same chemical, I've forgotten the name of the chemical, but they release the same chemical as a recently deceased mammal. And that brings in the flies, which pollinate the flowers. So they're pollinated largely by flies, which I just think is really cool. And historically, you weren't allowed to bring hawthorn into the house because it would bring on the plague. And it was because of the smells, because the smell of the flowers were the same as the smell of because obviously after the plague, you know, there were lots of dead bodies hanging around houses, and so yeah, so people knew, they associated the smell of hawthorn flowers with the smell of death. So I just find it amazing that we've got this flower, this plant that sort of has this sort of evolutionary wonderment going on, that smells like dead bodies in order to bring the flies in. So then, yes, provides. Stop talking about dead bodies. And so yeah, the flowers are good for pollinators. The berries, these are called haws, are really high in antioxidants. So there was a study a few years ago now, possibly about 10 years ago, that came out that said obviously berries have different levels of antioxidants in them. Those with the high, I've just done that again, haven't I? It's just fading into the garden. Those with the highest levels of antioxidants help birds, help relieve the physical stresses of migration on migrating birds. So things like thrushes, blackbirds. I mean, some birds that we don't think of as migrating actually do migrate a little bit or a lot. Robins, they eat the berries in autumn. And again, it's just like the wonder of nature. Everything's evolved to just be timed so perfectly. The berries come out in autumn, they fill their boots with the berries, then they fly off without any physical stresses. I think it's just muscle pain and stuff. It just means that, you know, if they're flying for like 2 days straight, they don't get cramp. So these are really, really useful. Hawthorn berries are sort of eaten very quickly in autumn compared to ivy berries, which are always left right until the end. Then you've got the leaves, which are munched on by lots of species, moths, aphids, thrips, all of those sorts of things. And then on a mature tree, you get quite gnarly bark, so that insects and things will hibernate among the bark. So yeah, it's just a wonder tree. It's absolutely wonderful, and I love it.
Interesting talking about timing, because what we've seen with this sort of so-called early autumn this year is that timing shifting forward a little bit. So those of you who really know about wildlife gardening and the impact of all these things on nature, is there a concern about that?
Oh, huge. I mean, climate change is just messing up all of the timings for everything. So bees are coming out of hibernation early, flowers are popping up in, you know, winter, you know, caterpillars, you know, just in spring, you know, the leaves burst, the moths lay eggs on the caterpillars, the baby birds need to eat the caterpillars. So there's just like a very sort of linear timeline that just keeps everything ticking over just very perfectly, and that's being disrupted. So yes, it is hugely worrying, and that's why as gardeners one of the things we can do is to keep things in flower all year round. So if a bee does come out of hibernation early, it's got some nectar and pollen to
Categories.
categories. Yeah, so yeah, grow flowers throughout the year, so that if bees come out of hibernation early, they've got something to feed themselves up on, because a bumblebee is only about 34 hours away from death if it doesn't have any nectar or pollen, or any nectar. Nectar gives them the energy they need to fly. So yeah, always have something in flower so that bees can feed if they come out of hibernation, and they can either go back in again or start a nest early, which some of them do, which is just quite terrifying. And supplementary feeding, so feeding of hedgehogs. I feed hedgehogs in my garden, especially this year. It's been absolutely terrible for hedgehogs because the ground was so dry, and they eat beetles and caterpillars. And yeah, so supplementary feeding. And I think for birds as well, you know, live mealworms if you can afford them, you know, when there's fewer caterpillars in the trees, just to keep things going. I think that can be really helpful.
I've been mocked a lot this year for having what I call a hedgehog drinker, which is basically a saucer that should be under a plant pot, but I've just sort of sunk it a little bit into the ground and put some water in it by the gate.
Yeah.
Because I know I think I only saw a hedgehog once, and the dog scared it away immediately. It was just really bad timing. The hedgehog came in, the dog went out, she woofed in its face, and it went straight back out again.
It would have come straight back in again when the dog went in.
I'm convinced that I never see them, but I'm sure they're there. So I have what I call the hedgehog drinker. My other half, on an almost daily basis, likes to laugh at me because he says we've only ever seen a hedgehog in this garden once, and yet you have a hedgehog drinker. But I think put them down anyway.
Get a night camera and put it out. I watch hedgehog videos every morning. So yeah, I put my little camera out, get my hedgehog videos. I've got a bird bath, which is a ground bird bath, which is actually just a hedgehog bath. And sometimes they take a bath in it, and sometimes they defecate in it, and then they still always drink from it. They're disgusting. But yes.
Hey, it's called recycling.
I believe so.
What a great way to start the day with your daily dose of hedgehog videos.
Tea in bed with hedgehog videos is the only way I ever want to start my day for the rest of my life.
I love it. Talking of hawthorn as well, you mentioned you can put it in a hedge. Of course, that is another way of introducing trees to your garden. If you have the space, the sort of time, the whatever to put a hedge together, and a lovely mixed native hedge, including trees, that's a great idea.
I think the fascinating thing about planting a hedge for nature, because I've done it here, and we planted originally. It's interesting because the hawthorn that was originally in our garden as field hedges, before it became garden, is a much earlier blooming hawthorn than the one that I bought in.
Oh, that's interesting.
But when I planted the hedges, I planted hawthorn, field maple, and holly.
Lovely.
Which are all for nature. But into that mix has come ivy, thanks to the birds eating the seeds and popping them out at the top of the hedge. So you get ivy. You get honeysuckle, woodbine, which is another lovely, pollinating plant for moths at night and all the rest of it. And then it has those lovely red berries which the birds take and then deposit the seed somewhere else, so somebody else has a honeysuckle. And all of those things. The only thing I don't allow in my hedges, because it really is too demanding on the humans that have to look after the hedges, and that is the dog rose.
Interesting.
I mean, people they don't want to go near a dog rose when the hedges need trimming. But all those other things that the evergreen of the ivy and the evergreen of the holly is good, lovely shelter in the winter. Late berries on the holly.
You get moths breeding in them. You get hedgehogs sleeping in the bottom.
Yeah.
And the other thing about hedges is because they're at the same height as the cars. If you plant a hedge in an urban environment, because they're at the same height as the pollution, they absorb more pollution than a tree. Per square meter, or whatever. But they're at the right level to absorb lots of polluting chemicals.
And if you're in an exposed position, they're great wind filters too.
Great wind, and again, wind is going to be quite a thing. Going forward. So we should all. I mean, every time there's a great big storm and people lose their fence panels, I sort of go on Twitter and plea that people replace them with hedges, because it will save them so much heartache in years to come, but also it's just so much better for wildlife.
Hedges, great idea. I thought that was that kind of, it might seem like an obvious thing, but actually in a book that's about 50 different tree species, to recommend hedge planting made absolute perfect sense. One
of the largest trees that probably you can, in this part of the world anyway, is the Mediterranean oak, Quercus Ilex. And we planted a hedge of that. And I first saw a hedge of that at Great Dixter in East Sussex, Christopher Lloyd's garden. And I thought, well, that's a very good evergreen hedge.
Interesting.
And when I planted my hedge, I planted a 30-centimetre sapling and an acorn at every metre, because I couldn't afford to do anything else. But it is interesting to know that, I mean, I'm coming from this in the angle of growing trees from seed, because trees are costly things to buy for a lot of people, but you can grow them from seed. I know, because I've done it. But 5 years after planting those acorns, they were taller than the saplings.
I can
believe that. But unless you know how oak trees, when they grow, they put down this taproot, and if you break that taproot, they take a long while to recover from it. So you only need to plant the seed and leave it where it is to grow.
It's something they often say about the kind of instant impact big expensive trees that people can buy, that obviously it fast tracks you a little bit, but basically within 5-10 years the little whips, the maidens, whatever that you plant, will kind of catch up and overtake anyway.
If you spend £100 on a tree, that tree's just going to sit there and sulk for 2 years. So if you spend £20 on a tree, it's going to go whoop. So yes, I'm a firm believer in. I mean, there's a balance, isn't there? Because for a lot of people who don't know, to prune a maiden, you want to get it to a point where I would say buying a tree that's like between 1 and 2 years old, so it's already had its sort of formative pruning done first, and then but yeah, buying like a 4 or 5 year old tree is not really worth it, I don't think.
Yeah. What was your next bit of show and tell?
So my next show and tell is my first conker of the year. So I mean, everyone loves conkers, right? We all love conkers, but I always get a conker, first conker of the year, and then it remains in a coat pocket pretty much for the whole year. And so you've got your autumn coats, you've got your spring coats, whatever. So my autumn coat always has a conker in the pocket, and it always gets to that point where I'm like, oh, it's a bit nippy, I'll get my autumn coat out, and I reach into the pockets, and there's at least one conker there. So yeah, it has significance. So
it also has another factor, Kate, because conkers were used as moth repellents.
Yes, and spider repellents. Yeah.
So your conker pocket would never get moth eaten.
I don't know how effective they were, but they've been used for lots of reasons, haven't they? But so the horse chestnut tree is one of the trees in the book. Obviously, if you've got a large garden, it's not native, it's native to the Balkans, but it's naturalized here, and lots of species feed on, obviously the bees love the sort of candelabra-esque flowers that come in spring, and then the leaves are eaten. There's the horse chestnut leaf miner, isn't there, which is causing some concern.
Yeah, it is. I think it's less of a threat to the tree and more a threat to the appearance of the tree.
Yeah, it just causes a very early autumn, doesn't it? It causes leaf, but the blue tits are I think, doing a good job of sort of getting that population in check, I think.
Well, there are other Aesculus, some of the North American buckeyes, as they're called. For people that I'm just sort of thinking, because a horse chestnut's a very big tree, it's very dark underneath. Nothing grows underneath a horse chestnut tree. And if you want to grow something that has conkers, and for the fun of that, or the seed and the same kind of flowers as the horse chestnut tree, varieties of Aesculus. And one is called Aesculus parviflora, and that has these much later than a horse chestnut tree, but it has these lovely candelabras in sort of pinky colours. And they're always full of insects and things. I've noticed I've got one in the garden here, which is lovely. And at the end of the year, you get these conkers, but they don't hang like a horse chestnut. They sit upright, like little blob on a stalk.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's funny, things like conkers, they have such sentimental value. I can't imagine there is anybody really watching or listening who didn't collect them when they were young. I never really did conker fighting. I just was amazed by them and sort of stroking them and polishing them.
The appearance of them is such that they look as if they've been varnished when they're fresh. Yeah. They've got this wonderful, wonderful shine.
They're wonderful. And my mum planted one of the ones from I think it was a conker tree at my first school. So she's got this, she's kept it. We didn't have a big enough garden to let it go wild. So she's just kept it in a massive bin, an absolutely huge sort of pot. And it had its second conker this year. It's a little bit sort of limited by being in this pot. But yeah, second conker from my primary school tree.
Brilliant.
And your third and I think final show and tell?
So this is just a pine cone that I got from like a Scots pine that sort of grows near me. I like pine cones, and I've got a little nature table downstairs, and I've always got about 6 pine cones on it because I am 6 years old, and yeah.
I completely relate to that. I mean, one of the trees not native, of course, that we planted here first of all for a shelter belt tree was the Monterey pine from America, Pinus radiata. It's a fast-growing tree, but has those whopping great cones on it. And whenever they drop, I'm gathering them up. And it's become a habit when I go anywhere to a garden or to somewhere and I spot an unusual pine cone, I have to ask if I can have it.
Oh, yeah.
And it happened to a greater degree than anywhere else in the grounds of Sandringham House in Norfolk, which is King Charles III's residence in Norfolk.
Lovely.
And I was being given a private tour of the garden by the head gardener, the then head gardener. And I said, can I pick a few of the pine cones? He said, yeah, please do. You'll save us a job because we'll gather them up before the mower comes round. So I came back with a lovely selection of pine cones from there. But, it's another thing people should probably be aware of is the fact that you can grow pine trees.
Yes.
You sit your cone somewhere and it opens in the heat. As you're done there.
Here,
yeah, and you can get the seeds out of it, and if you give those seeds the chance to germinate, they will.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think as well that some birds have their bills, sort of perfectly adapted to get the seeds out of the gaps in the pine cones.
Yeah,
really special.
One of our smallest birds in England, the goldcrest, is a great lover of pine trees.
Yeah.
Tiny little bird, you get one in a matchbox.
Yeah.
Isn't it a wonderful thing when you get given seed? I went for a look around the gardens at Robinson College in Cambridge, which actually, shout out to them, they basically open all the year round for the National Garden Scheme, almost all year. You just have to book in and you can go and have a wander around and raise money for charity at the same time. And I was thinking, oh, that tree is amazing. And it was, and I don't know the real name, the proper name of it, but the golden rain tree looked amazing, covered in all of its golden rain, which was also a little bit sort of peachy and Albany. And said, oh, would you like some seed? So now I've got to figure out whether or not it's easy to grow. But I've got
it is relatively easy from seed. I've done it. But does not flower well in cold, wet summers. So it's thanks to this year's period of drought and all the heat that we had that has flowered so well. Ours did brilliantly in the garden here, and it's a joy to behold because it flowers rather later than most other trees. So it's July onwards. So it's nice to have it for that.
Yeah, I dream of many, many trees in whatever this magical, mythical future garden is where I have lots of room for them. So I might as well make a start trying to grow some from seed. Before we wind things up, Kate, we always do FLOMO for anyone joining us for the first time. It's our sort of flower, plant, tree, anything living and green and wonderful that gives us a fear of missing out. Your book, as someone who wants to grow a multitude of trees, certainly gave me lots of FLOMO. I don't actually know why I don't have a spindle, because I am obsessed with all things sort of orange and the whole orange pink fruit seed combo. I mean, that every time I see them out and about, I think, oh, I really need this in my garden. So you shot spindle up there to near the top of my FLOMO list. And you and my walk around Robinson College reminded me of how desperately I want a Persian ironwood.
Parrotia.
Yeah.
The autumn colour was just starting to really glow when I laid eyes on it the other day.
Can I tell you what's equally thrilling about Parrotia persica is the actual fact the flowers. They're not big. They are not big, but they are the most wonderful coral red.
They're like little rubies.
They're gorgeous, aren't they? Yeah. Really beautiful. Really beautiful.
I adore.
And they happen. There's not much else happening around at that for colour at that time of the year. You know, so February, March, April, and it's just a joy to behold.
Lovely. Yeah.
I tell you what, if anybody wants to see spectacular trees with autumn colour, go to Sheffield Park just outside London, because they have the most fabulous Parrotias there. And I mean, as you say, Thunder, it's just like watching a huge, great bonfire unfold in front of your eyes. It's fabulous.
Yeah, so lots of tree FLOMO in this corner. Thank you, Kate, for igniting it all, reigniting it. Where are you at with your FLOMO?
Do you know what? It's quite boring. It's very, but I absolutely love them, and kind of wish I planted them, or one of them in the garden instead of in one of the choices, or as well as. It's a crabapple. Which variety? I mean, there's so many varieties. I sort of get lost in the varieties.
Alan will tell you one.
Yeah, go on.
He's
Alan,
got a favourite.
Give me a variety.
Well, I love Red Sentinel.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because you get your apple blossom as you do in any crabapple tree, but it's the crabs themselves, the apples, because they turn red round about now, and they stay on the tree until February, March, when their time comes to be eaten by the birds.
Yeah.
I don't know how they know.
I think it's either something to do with the calorific or antioxidant value, or how well they keep, because the ivy berries never get taken until right at the end of winter.
Yeah,
it's either because they don't taste very nice and they're like, oh god, we've got to go on the ivy berries now, or the ivy berries are so high in calories that they help the birds get into shape for breeding in spring. No one quite knows, but they are very, very high in calories.
Well, they certainly produce fat pigeons around here because they love balancing in the ivy.
Yeah. But I really like there's a yellow variety, a yellow fruiting
Golden Hornet.
Yeah, I think it's that one. And there's one on the allotment that I walk past, and I'll walk past in spring, and it's like, oh, you can't see the branches for the blossom. It's amazing. It's always humming with insects. And then when it fruits, it's just completely you can't see the branches. for the fruit, and then all sort of falls to the ground and all gets really mushy and smells really autumnal, and there are wasps everywhere, which makes me very happy. So yeah, I just think it's a good all rounder. And if I planted the garden again, I would probably try and make room for a crabapple, or just move house and go and grow on it.
Well, I'll tell you what you could do. I mean, for people that don't have that much room, you could get a maiden crabapple tree, and you could grow it as either as a cordon, or you could grow it as an espalier. So you gradually trim the branches. It keeps it slim. So if you want a dividing area in your garden, because your eye stops at whatever there is, you could use crab apples for that, and that's the way of growing them without having a big tree.
Yeah,
that is a good idea. And you've also made me, I'm not sure I would really, basically I think my box hedge is going to go. I have so many box moths this year. It's like a box moth party out there every night, and they just dance around right by the window where I'm working at the kitchen table going like,
tease you.
I think that's probably going to go at some point, and maybe I do something completely different rather than put a little hedge in there. Maybe I do train something and create a little barrier.
There is such a thing as a step over apple.
Yes.
I mean, I've got them in our garden here, and you just have this. It's like a single espalier going off to the right or to the left, or one to go each way. But and they're probably about 45 centimeters from the ground. Yeah. And if you prune them correctly, you will actually get step over apple trees.
They're amazing. They're amazing. They're really good for lining paths, aren't they, on allotments?
Absolutely, yeah. They work really well.
Right then, Alan, Flomo time. What would you like to add to the mix?
Well, I'm gradually increasing my varieties of Euonymus spindles. You mentioned them, and I thought, oh, that's gone, so I'll have to pick another one. I'm gradually increasing those, and you know how you get the capsule, which is bright pink, and it splits open to reveal an orange berry in the middle. Well, a friend of ours called Tim Fuller, who you know, he produced a variety, I don't know where he got it from, which has got white pips in the middle. So I've got that to plant in the garden. I know exactly where it's going. The other thing I'm interested to do, now that my trees have got big enough, is to let the trees play hosts to other climbers. And some of the climbing roses that I've got in the garden, I mean, lots of them are named, but since they've grown tall enough to have these great festoons of hips that are falling out of the tree and just looking spectacular, somewhere between now and Christmas time, birds, if the birds leave them alone, that is, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, which is interesting, which we touched on. How do they know whether they're ripe or whether they're not? I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to have more roses and trees. I've now got seedlings, and I dug one up earlier this year because it was in the way, and thinking that it was probably a seedling of Rosa glauca, but it wasn't. It's much more vigorous. So that's one that's going to go into a tree somewhere. And I'm interested in using other climbers in trees as well, just to see what happens. And I think, I'm painting the sky as well as the ground. So if you've got a tree, remember you can paint the sky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of excitement. You've really got us all thinking, Kate, and I'm sure you will do, everybody else. Perfectly timed, all of these wonderful gardening books coming out just in time to snap them up and wrap them up for Christmas.
Snap and wrap time.
So the tree in my garden, it's beautiful. And actually something we didn't say sort of as part of the podcast proper is it's full of the most beautiful illustrations.
Gorgeous. And my dog's in it. Did you see my dog's in it?
Yes.
Where is she? Oh, will I find it? Will I find it in time? I don't know. Anyway, my dog's in it, and yes, I like that. I like the fact that they indulged me and put my doggy in.
Well, it's nice because that's personal.
Yeah.
No, my dog, I'd try to get her on every page if I wrote a book, to be honest. They probably wouldn't indulge that. Yeah. I hope it flies off the shelves, Kate. It's a lovely, lovely book, and it's been a real treat to catch up with you. And
thank you. And thanks for having me on the show. It's brilliant.
And that garden looks fabulous. Thank you, everybody, and happy gardening.
Happy gardening. Love talking to you, Kate.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm all right. How are you?
Can't see me. I'm good, thanks.
Don't worry. Oh, look, you've got your garden as your backdrop. That's very
yeah. Otherwise, you get a spare bed and like my washing that I haven't done yet. So yes, that's it's the garden.
Well, if I keep looking over here, I think my dog is about to do that thing where she lays just out of reach. And
My dog might come in, but
That's fine.
at the moment she's mucking up my bed.
We quite like Alan quite often. He's got like 2 little spaniels. He also has one extremely old Lhasa but she never makes an appearance. She just sort of trundles around the garden and sees what crumbs she can pilfer from people in the tea room. Now, are you coming? You're coming, arriving. There he is.
Now, where are you?
Oh, can you not see me?
Sophia, I've got them wrong.
It's episode 96.
Sorry, I've got a very vocal cat in here.
Oh, hello.
Probably see. Hello. Good morning. Yes. Hello. Yeah.